What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Good to have you today or tomorrow or whenever you're watching this. We're going to talk about anxiety, depression, mental health, these sorts of things. And one thing I've learned as I've talked to different people about this, because I've had to learn, is that you really need a holistic approach. Because sometimes there's physical things going on that need to be addressed, no doubt about that. Sometimes there's emotional things, there's past trauma, there's all sorts of things. But we need to address the spiritual aspect as well. And so I'm an advocate for a full panel of diagnosis if you're suffering in this area, to go, what all do you need to address? And I do believe in addressing all of them, body, mind, and spirit. Today we're going to talk very much about the spiritual side, but we'll find out from our guest what all he had to go through, because he's dealt with this. He's a pastor up in the Seattle area, New Day Church in Federal Way, Washington, if anybody's local up there. He is also the author of a book that just came out last week, and it is called Perfectly Suited. It looks like this, and it talks about, the armor of God for the anxious mind. That is a part of it. Loretta, thank you for being here. We'll be praying for Judy. I know she's struggling in the physical area, and when you're struggling physically, I go to a doctor. I take the medicines, and so I really am an advocate for doing whatever you need to get yourself well. So, JD, I appreciate you being here today and willing to share your story. Good to have you.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
So let's dive into it. I'd really like to hear sort of your experience, because I know we relate to people and the things that they've been through, and it can help people get better. Tell us what you've been through.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think for the majority of my adult life, I was pretty out of touch with my own emotions. I really couldn't tell you at any given time what I was feeling, what was going on inside. And I kind of just saw myself as steady Eddie, super calm all the time. But really it was more just not really being aware. And, even when we're not aware of what's going on, our bodies and our minds do know what's going on, and they're going to get our attention eventually. And sometimes that's going to come out sideways. And for me, I hit what I call my mental and emotional wall, where all of a sudden I just found my mind racing out of control. I was being bombarded by all these intrusive thoughts that I couldn't stop, and my mind was scaring me. I didn't realize at the time that I was experiencing some of the classic symptoms of OCD, because I didn't have a diagnosis at that point, and this was all felt very out of character for me. And so I went on a walk with a friend of mine who also happens to be a therapist, and so that was handy. Yeah. But we were walking, and I'm going along, and I'm a wreck. I'm just crying, and I'm pouring out all my everything that's going on, and the tears were very uncharacteristic of me, and I felt so out of control. And I got to the end, and I was just bewildered, and I said, I am not an anxious person. And he looked at me and he laughed, and that wasn't the reaction I was going for. Yeah. But it was just what I needed, because it really pulled me up short and made me go, oh, I'm not seeing myself the way other people are actually perceiving what's going on with me, and I need to pay attention to this. And so that kind of began to set me on this journey to find out what was going on, and then to get some help.
Yeah, so interesting. Our body is very good at telling us symptoms of problems. I've had physical issues that needed surgery, and the body was telling me. And at first I didn't recognize my physical symptoms either. And you have to listen. So So your body's screaming at you
Yes.
through your brain, even too. So we would call it, mental. Um, what what did you do to try to diagnose it?
Yeah. Well, I was at a loss because it felt so foreign to me, and so and it was a lot of physical things. I really loved what you said at the beginning about needing to take a holistic approach, because anxiety just does encompass so many different things and can have so many different causes feeding into it. And so I just began to explore all the different possibilities. And, I was experiencing, loss of sleep, and where it would feel sometimes like someone had just stomped on a packet of adrenaline that shot through my body. And then once it's going, you can't settle back down. And so it would move from whatever had mentally caused it to what was now a physical thing. And I couldn't get out of that.
Yeah.
And I remember one night, I was having another kind of panic attack in the night, and feeling like, oh man, this feels like spiritual warfare. And so, like, it just felt like this volley of arrows coming at me. And so I'm reaching for the shield of faith, and I'm praying that God would cover me with it. And I don't know what I expected, but I didn't get it. That whole night, I didn't fall back asleep. I didn't have any peace that passes understanding come settle over me. And it really made me realize that I had kind of a shallow view of the armor of God, and maybe had some magical thinking around how it worked. And so really began to look into that from a different angle. I'd never really associated the armor of God with anxiety before. And so, but I began to see this huge gift that God had given us in it, that it was unbeknownst to me before.
What did you find out? What was causing it? Was it physical? Was it emotional?
I think there were a lot of factors for me. And as I began to look at my life a little more deeply, I could see that it wasn't like this sudden break from my reality. It was more like reaching a tipping point where I had kind of been struggling for a long time and just hadn't been paying attention. And I can actually go clear back to when I was probably fourth grade, and that was really I went through a season then of what I'm sure now would be diagnosed as OCD, and which is very common for obsessive compulsive disorder, for it to come on as a kid. So yeah, I think there were a variety of factors. Of course, I'm concerned that it's something spiritual going on, or is this because of some sin in my life? Is this because is this trauma from childhood? Is this, what is it? And I think at the end of the day, I kind of came to the conclusion, I'm not going to be able to source out necessarily what the cause was, but the end result is the same, in that I'm afflicted and I need God's mercy. And so,
were you a pastor at this time?
Oh yeah. This is all going on while I'm still trying to function in a daily capacity and provide care for the congregation, and put together a weekly sermon and all that. And that's another characteristic of OCD is sometimes operating on these two levels, where you're highly functional in one space while you're just falling apart in another. So for a long time, I'd say the congregation wasn't necessarily fully aware even of what was going on for me. And then I began to talk about it more, which was super helpful.
Yeah. And I want to ask about that in a second, but here's what I've noticed is that we tend to approach an issue like this from the angle that sort of we're coming from. In other words, if you don't believe in God, you're not going to talk about spiritual armor. But for a lot of Christians, we go straight to the spiritual, which is, again, part of it. But we can easily overlook the physical or sometimes the emotional. What was your solution?
Well, a couple of things. I think you're really right. I think especially for Christians, anxiety is interesting to try to cope with, because we see so many verses around, don't be afraid, don't be anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we add on this layer of viewing this suffering as sin in some way, like we're not doing the right thing. If
Right.
we're a good Christian, we can't feel this way.
Right.
Rather than viewing those words of Christ as reassurance rather than a reprimand. And that it's like a parent. A parent would never try to convince a child to be brave by scolding them. They would want to take away the source of the fear. So I think beginning to reinterpret how I had evaluated scriptures around anxiety. Once I'm actually going through it myself, it's just different when you're rather than lecturing other people on what they need to do with their anxiety when you're going through it.
Right.
I went to spiritual resources. I went to counseling.
Okay.
And that was a big part for me. Really, honestly, the talking about it was super important. Mr. Rogers said, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And I think that's really true. Once you can put words around something, it sort of de-shames it.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden I found, that was actually a real point of connection with other people too, because once they could relate to what I was going through, then it's like, oh yeah, we're all human.
I hear that a lot. In fact, I hear that is critical to counseling, talking to people, and different levels for different people. I get that. Did you think that talking about it would bring shame and condemnation from others on you? Was that a concern going into it?
Yeah. I don't think I would have actually said that that's what I thought, but I think I did have that fear, especially, when it feels sometimes like in my role that
Right.
what people expect of me is to be the one who has it together, who has the answers, be the expert. Yeah. And so it was humbling. It felt very exposed and vulnerable to be able to do that. Did
people react that way?
No, not at all.
So
It was actually when my first sermon that I preached about it and really shared about it is probably still to this day the one where the most people responded to me and said, "Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Thank you. That spoke directly to me." And so it was eye-opening to go, "Oh, yeah, there's no benefit to putting up my own guard around this," because, and then again, that just tied it back to the armor of going, I can't hold on to my own defenses here and God's protection of me.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to get to the armor real quick. Interesting, the scripture that says confess your sins one to another doesn't say so you may be forgiven. It says so you may be healed.
Yes. Yes.
It's like, what that there's something. I don't fully understand it, but God made it this way. There's something about community and community of believers and talking to people that there's a level of healing in that. I do want to ask, before we get to some of the spiritual armor side of things, did you have to address anything physically? Did you have to adjust your diet? Did you have to go on any sort of supplements? Any medical treatment?
I'm really I tell people that if you need the medication, because there are physical components to all of it, especially they've even identified with OCD parts of the brain that are very much involved. And if you've got a chemical imbalance or whatever, there is certainly no shame in medicating. And I think I ended up, I had a diagnosis where the psychiatrist did offer me a prescription. I felt like where I personally was at the time, that I was managing okay and didn't need it. I did some diet things and some supplement things. But I think really making all the resources available
Yeah.
Jesus is the great physician. And so, I think he made our physical bodies and knows that we have physical needs just as we have spiritual needs. So.
Yeah, yeah. There's an old joke, maybe you know it, about a guy who's a Christian whose boat capsized, and he's in the water. And he says, "Lord, Lord, help me, Lord, help me!" And another boat comes by, and they throw down a lifeline, and he's like, "No, I don't need it. God's gonna save me. God's gonna save me." And they go on. Another boat comes by, and he's still got his head above water, and they like, "Do you need some help?" And he's like, "No, I pray God's going to save me. God's going to save me." And another boat comes by, the same thing. God eventually drowns, and he gets to heaven, and he goes, "Lord, why didn't you save me? I called out to you. I prayed." And God's like, "I sent 3 boats."
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, exactly.
And I think sometimes, I don't know your theological background, but in some theological backgrounds, or just through the idea of shame or embarrassment or whatever, we don't go to the resources God has given us.
Right.
And take advantage of it, and we sit there and suffer, and God's going, "Look, I made a way for you." And especially today with technology in medicine and things, it's like there are ways. And I do think you should pray, especially before taking some of the anxiety drugs have some very negative side effects. So I again, holistic. So I appreciate you sharing in that regard. I want to show people real quick again your book, Perfectly Suited, because you're talking about the armor of God, and this is where I'm curious how that played into you after experiencing an episode where your body was a little freaking out, and you read it and you didn't get any relief and thought, okay, I need something else going on here. How did you circle back and go, what does this mean, and what did you learn?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a Christian home, and so I was very familiar with the armor of God, and I think we sang all the Sunday school songs about being Christian soldiers and all that kind of thing. But I think the emphasis always, from my understanding of it, was about the picking up and putting it on, which really, when you stop and think about it, then that puts the emphasis on our role with it and what we're doing with it. And so pretty soon then that becomes almost a burden, because it becomes this Christian duty to get right. Like I need to be working harder at this armor. And you go, well, if it's armor, that means it's there to protect me. And so it should be something that's doing something for me rather than me doing something for it. And so, flipping that around and going, okay, I know that all of this is all of that I was experiencing was taking me to my coping things of trying to protect and guard myself, put up these defenses. And I call it the armor of me, where, you're trying to deflect, deny what's going on, or use humor to just pass it off or whatever. There's all these things that we go to in our own attempts to kind of create our own shield and protection. Yeah. And so what I really began to reconnect with was this idea of really the only thing that makes me okay in the world and okay with God is what Christ did for me on the cross. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately my armor is Christ himself and what he has done. And so when I can hide in him, then he really is my shield. He's my only standing before God. And so when I was at this place where my mind was like, I think if anything in my life, but I felt like I had a measure of, self identity and understanding of myself, it was kind of my mind, my feeling like I was in control of my own brain. And I've always been the compliant overachiever kid who, always did what was expected of me. And now here I am at a place and there's nothing I can do to seem to fix what's happening in my brain and to go, oh, that's what grace is for. It's for the very thing that I can't fix myself. That's right. That's why it's grace. Right. And so it took me I've always preached grace, but I've never viscerally felt the need for it the way that this made me feel. And so So that's kind of where it threw me into the armor of going, yeah, I don't want to just describe the armor biblically. I want to wear it. I want to climb inside it and hang on to it and have it do its work for me.
One question, and not to challenge what you said, just to try to work. I've never thought about it, so I'm thinking through this live on the air. It does say put it on, put on. Is
Right.
that not an instruction for us?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. What I discovered was that word there can also be translated as to sink into. And I really liked that visual, like, you sink into a big soft couch, or you sink into a chair and you go, well, that's less about effort. That's more about being held by this thing and going, as I can envision. I absolutely need to put it on, but I can think of it as in a less striving sort of way. It's more receiving it than it is trying to force it to work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. And also, I have a bit of a theological problem going on because I am not a Calvinist, and I don't believe you can earn your salvation, and I don't believe that you can lose your salvation. Or do you think, are you once saved, always saved guy?
Well, yeah, and I think that's
because here's where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
If you can put on the helmet of salvation, can you take it off?
Yeah. Well, and I guess it depends on whether the helmet of salvation means to put on salvation itself, or the benefits of salvation.
That's good.
I really, the helmet is maybe the one that I'm most affectionate about, especially because this was all happening in my mind. Yeah. And I began to think about the doctors who you'll see a patient who's had some sort of head injury or surgery, who post the injury they're put in a helmet. And I realized that this helmet is not only to protect me from the battles outside, it's holding me together with what's going on in my head at the same time. And I think also another little illustration, I took my son snowboarding when he was in middle school, and I'm like the least athletic person in the world, had never done. So we went and got lessons and make this one final run down the hill, and I just lose it. And I am flipping end over end, right, directly under the chairlift. So everybody saw what was happening. And I probably had a concussion because I had a headache for a month after that. But I was wearing a helmet. And the thing that I realized was the helmet wasn't there to prevent the accident. It wasn't there to make me a better snowboarder. It was there to preserve my life. And and so, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question. I think more going, what this helmet is for our benefit. And we can either choose to wear it or not wear it. And I think we can choose to either live within the protections of the salvation that God has given us or not. And yeah.
So interesting. I love getting into the Greek and the nuances and the meanings of the words, because sometimes the translations I think are not good, frankly. And sometimes they can be a little misleading because language changes over time.
Right.
And especially, in English context of something. So to sink into, put it this way, here's something everybody can relate to. During COVID, they told us at first, if you're wearing a mask, a decent mask, you don't have to worry about getting COVID. I would behave differently in a crowd with a mask on versus not with a mask on. In other words, if I didn't have a mask on and I found myself around close quarters of a bunch of people, especially in the early days where we didn't know how bad this thing was, we didn't know, with a lot we didn't know, you do get a little anxious because you go, oh, gosh, am I going to? But if I have the mask on and I believe that it's effective. I'm a lot more relaxed. Now, mask arguments aside, COVID aside, if God says salvation is this free gift of grace and you have accepted that, then you have put on that helmet of salvation, and to sink into it is act like it.
Yeah. Yes.
Believe it.
Yes.
Yeah. And it changes your behavior and how you go through things. Did believing that the armor of God was something that you had been given change the way you approached life?
Yeah. I think what it did, it certainly hasn't taken the anxiety away.
It's a good point.
I think my prayers initially were, God, you've got to take this away. I need you to just, it's too much. And I've learned that what I needed was not for him to take the anxiety away, but to take the power of the anxiety away. And it can be there. The things that are making me anxious can still be there, but I can pray differently and let it not control my life. And so I think being able to flip it around and say, okay, God, this thing that I hate about how my brain is functioning now, rather than, it's my brain, it's probably going to work this way forever. And so God, take it and use it for your glory. Take it and redeem it. P.T. Forsyth talks about the sacrament of pain and how our suffering can actually be a point that we can see God in it. And so to say, okay, God, show up in this and meet me in this and be honored by it.
I think that's
how
key.
it's changed.
Well, so okay, nobody puts on armor to go out of the battle. They put on armor to go into the battle.
Right.
So Paul's analogy there isn't saying this is what's going to keep you from the battle. It says this is what's going to help you fight the battle.
Exactly.
So as you fight, it changes when you know you've got the armor on. You can fight with confidence.
Yeah.
I think it's very important what you said there, that it didn't go away because it may not. Just like I've got physical things that aren't going away. I'm living with the defect, or the damage would be accurate, the rest of my life.
Sure.
But it doesn't control my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you think about Paul talking about his thorn, and he prayed, and at first he did. That was his prayer. Take it away, Lord. And God didn't answer that. And you go, okay, well, boy, is that a failure? And yet God said that was the very place that Paul would see his strength. And so what started out as Paul calling a messenger of Satan ends up being this tool that God uses that has blessed countless people ever since. And so, I think that actually Paul's experience has been a big comfort to me, to go, not getting what I asked for in prayer is okay, because if that's okay for Paul, then it's got to be okay for me.
Yeah.
So.
And by the way, my first prayer is, Lord, take this away.
Yes, exactly.
and I think that's entirely appropriate.
Yes, absolutely.
But when he doesn't, that's the key. When he doesn't, and you end up suffering whatever level, there is still hope in the suffering. And, and that's the message I want people. Let me ask you one real quick about one scripture. You're a pastor. The don't be anxious about anything, as you kind of alluded to earlier. Sometimes that can sound like, that's a failure point for me because I'm anxious.
Right.
There's a condemning verse. But again, when you look at the original language, and perhaps you know this, is that it's the don't be there is there's an activity. It really means don't dwell on the anxiety. And if you look at the rest of the scripture, it makes perfect sense. It says, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So it's not condemnation if you have anxiety. It's saying don't dwell on it. Here's what you do with it.
Yes. I think that is really true. And I think that, you look at Peter's words too, and he says, cast all your anxieties on God. He doesn't say don't have anxieties. Here's what to do when you have them. I think that's really true.
All right. I want to give you the last word. I want to show people before we go out real quick your website, jdpeabody.com. Looks just like this. There's the URL. And you've got some other books. Is that Inkwell Chronicles out yet?
That's coming out in a month. And yeah, it's very odd how both these books ended up coming out at the same time, because they seem so different. One is a children's novel, and then this, I like to tell people though, and because both books have been like over 5 years in the creation. Yeah. But the one is like the armor book sort of describes my experience, and I describe the other book as my therapy going through it. That was my play. That was my mental health. And so in my mind, they're related, but they seem far afield from each other.
Yeah, interesting. All right. So here's the one we were talking about today. Perfectly Suited. You can get it wherever you get books. And of course, jdpeabody.com. You can see both of them there. And JD, I appreciate, man, you sharing openly and just working through it. Again, the talking, and hoping really that someone who may be struggling with this has benefited from the conversation. What would you want them to maybe walk away from after this discussion?
Yeah, I think really what you said is the key. I would hope by sharing my own story that it helps people maybe feel a little less alone in their own suffering. And I'm so sorry if that's your experience and it's excruciating. And I just would want to say, yeah, you're not alone, and God has a number of resources like the armor that are so much bigger than we thought. The grace there for us is so much greater than we knew. And I just want to encourage people to reach out for the help that's available.
Yep. And if you feel like you're failing, another thing Paul said, having done everything, stand.
Yes.
So go do the everything, and even when you feel like you've done everything, keep standing. And the promises are true. You can hang on to the promises of God. Appreciate you being here, Teresa. I'm glad this was helpful. Anyone else watching this after it's already aired, I'd love to hear your comments, especially if there's something that spoke to you. If you haven't subscribed or followed, or what's the other one, liked, do that now, and hit share for someone that needs to hear this encouragement today. And come back. We've got more for you here on Life Today Live. I'll see you again next time.
Come unto me, God incarnate as the appointed mediator between God and man. No man comes to the Father but by me. The only way to God is Jesus Christ.